She laughed at me in front of everyone, absolutely certain Mom would leave everything to her. The golden daughter who'd controlled every family decision for years, who'd orchestrated the funeral like a performance with herself as the star. I was just the outsider sister from Denver, the one who abandoned the family. But when the lawyer's voice cut through her smug confidence that Tuesday afternoon, reading words that would shatter her world completely, I watched her face drain of color. The $2.7 million house she'd already promised to sell, it was mine. Every single brick of it. My name is Rachel Whitmore, and I learned about my mother's death through a text message. Not a phone call, not even a voicemail. A text from my sister Lauren at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning. Mom passed at 4:30 funeral arrangements in progress. That was it. 37 years of life, and this was how I found out the woman who raised me was gone. I stared at my phone in the break room at Crest Point Innovations, my coffee growing cold as the words blurred through my tears. My project management team was probably wondering why I'd been in there for 20 minutes, but I couldn't move. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead while I processed the reality that I'd missed my mother's final moments by over 2 hours. The flight from Denver to Savannah felt endless. Every mile carried me back to a family dynamic I'd spent years trying to escape. Lauren had always been the one in control, the eldest, the one who stayed close to home, the daughter who made all the right choices according to our mother's Southern sensibilities. I was the one who'd moved away for college and never came back, who built a career in Colorado while Lauren remained the dutiful daughter in Georgia. When I finally arrived at the Savannah airport, there was no one waiting for me. I'd hoped, maybe that someone from the family would pick me up. Instead, I rented a car and drove through the familiar Spanish moss-draped streets alone, past the antebellum mansions and manicured gardens that had defined my childhood. The funeral home was buzzing with activity when I arrived. Flowers everywhere, people in expensive black clothing, and at the center of it all was Lauren. She wore a perfectly tailored black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her blonde hair styled in an elegant chignon. She was directing traffic like a wedding planner, pointing here and there, making decisions about flower arrangements and seating charts. "Oh, Rachel," she said when she finally noticed me standing in the doorway. Her voice carried that particular tone she'd perfected over the years, surprise tinged with mild disapproval. "You made it." Not, "I'm so glad you're here," or "Mom would have wanted you here." Just acknowledgement of my presence, like I was a distant acquaintance who'd shown up unexpectedly. "Of course I made it," I said, setting down my overnight bag. She was my mother too. Lauren's smile was arctic. "Of course she was, though we haven't seen much of you these past few years." The accusation hung in the air between us. It was true I hadn't visited as often as I should have. Work had been demanding. Life had gotten complicated, and every time I'd planned a trip, something had come up. But Lauren made it sound like I'd abandoned the family entirely, like I was some heartless daughter who'd forgotten where she came from. "I called her every week," I said quietly. "Phone calls," Lauren repeated, as if the words tasted bitter. "How lovely." Around us, relatives and family friends continued their preparations. I recognized some faces: Uncle Martin, Aunt Dorothy, old family friends from the country club. But they all seemed to be taking their cues from Lauren, treating me with polite distance. I was clearly the outsider here, the prodigal daughter who'd shown up too late. The next morning brought a steady stream of visitors to the house. Our childhood home sat in one of Savannah's most prestigious neighborhoods, a 3-story Victorian mansion that had been in our family for generations, worth at least $2.5 million, probably more in today's market. I'd grown up taking its grandeur for granted: the wraparound porches, the original hardwood floors, the gardens that required a full-time groundskeeper. Lauren had taken over completely. She answered the door, accepted casseroles, directed the florist where to put arrangements. I felt like a guest in my own childhood home, uncertain of my place in the carefully orchestrated grief process she'd created. 3 days after the funeral, I was folding my few belongings back into my suitcase when Lauren knocked on my bedroom door. "The will reading is tomorrow at 2 p.m., she said without preamble. "I suppose you'll want to be there." The way she said it made it clear she wished I wouldn't be. "Yes," I said, "I'll be there." "Fine." She turned to leave, then paused. "Don't expect much. Rachel, Mom was very clear about her wishes regarding people who actually showed up when it mattered." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone with the implication of her words. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, surrounded by pink wallpaper I'd begged to change when I was 16, and wondered what exactly I was walking into tomorrow. The drive to the family estate the next morning felt like traveling back through time. I'd checked out of my hotel early, needing these final hours in the house where I'd grown up before. Whatever happened at the will reading changed everything forever. The wrought iron gates stood open, just as they had throughout my childhood when we'd expected guests. But something felt different now. The sprawling oak trees that had once seemed like protective guardians now cast shadows that felt ominous. The circular driveway, where Lauren and I had learned to ride bikes and later practiced parallel parking, stretched before me like a runway leading to an uncertain destination. I parked beside Lauren's pristine white Mercedes, a car that probably cost more than I made in 6 months at Crest Point Innovations. Even her choice of vehicle seemed calculated to remind everyone of her position in the family hierarchy. The house itself took my breath away, just as it always had. 3 stories of Victorian grandeur, with its distinctive turquoise shutters and wraparound porches adorned with intricate gingerbread trim. The gardens were immaculate, every hedge precisely manicured, every flower bed a masterpiece of color and design. This wasn't just a house, it was a statement, a testament to 4 generations of Whitmore success and Southern aristocracy. But as I climbed the front steps, I noticed what I'd missed in my grief-stricken state over the past few days. The warmth was gone. This house had once been filled with my mother's laughter, with the smell of her famous peach cobbler, with the sound of classical music drifting from the parlor where she'd practiced piano every morning. Now it felt like a museum, beautiful but cold, preserved rather than lived in. Maribel answered the door before I could knock. She'd been our housekeeper for nearly 20 years, arriving when I was in high school. A small woman with kind eyes and graying hair, always pulled back in a neat bun. She'd been more than staff, she'd been family. My mother had trusted her completely, and Maribel had loved our family in return. "Miss Rachel," she said, but her usual warm smile seemed strained. She glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping aside to let me in. "It's good to see you." Something in her voice made me pause. Maribel had never been nervous around me. If anything, she'd been the one person in this house who'd treated me exactly the same whether I lived here or visited from Denver. "Maribel, is everything okay?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, her eyes darting toward the kitchen where I could hear Lauren's voice giving instructions to someone on the phone. "Everything is fine, Miss Rachel," she said quietly, but her hands twisted the dish rag she was holding. "Miss Lauren has been very particular about the arrangements today." Before I could ask what she meant, Lauren's voice carried from the kitchen. "Maribel, I told you to use the Waterford crystal for the wine service. This is an important occasion, not a casual gathering." I followed the sound of her voice, finding Lauren standing at the marble kitchen island with her phone pressed to her ear. She was dressed impeccably again, a black silk blouse and tailored gray slacks that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a low chignon, and she wore the pearl earrings that had belonged to our grandmother. "No, the caterer needs to understand that the service begins at exactly 2 p.m., she was saying. "Not 2:05, not 2:10, 2 o'clock sharp." Caterer. I looked around the kitchen, noticing for the first time the elaborate preparations underway. Cases of wine glasses, silver trays being polished, fresh flowers being arranged in crystal vases. This wasn't a simple will reading. Lauren was throwing a party. She ended her call and turned to me with that same cool smile I'd grown accustomed to over the past few days. "Rachel, I wasn't expecting you this early." "I wanted to spend some time in the house before—" I gestured vaguely, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Before the reading." "Yes." She picked up a wine glass and held it to the light, checking for spots. "I've arranged for a small reception afterward. Nothing elaborate, just something appropriate for the family and close friends." A reception, after our mother's will reading. The casual way she said it made my stomach turn. "Don't you think that's a bit premature?" I asked. "We don't even know what the will says." Lauren set down the glass and fixed me with a look that was part pity, part condescension. "Oh, Rachel, sweet, naive Rachel." She moved closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "Mother and I discussed her wishes extensively. I know exactly what the will says." The certainty in her voice sent a chill through me. Of course she knew. Lauren had spent the last 5 years living 20 minutes away, visiting twice a week, managing our mother's social calendar and medical appointments. I'd been the daughter who called every Sunday and sent flowers on holidays. "I'm sure she provided for both of us," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, they sounded weak. Lauren's laugh was like breaking glass. "Provided for both of us," she repeated. "Yes, I'm sure she did, in her own way." She turned back to her preparations, dismissing me as effectively as if she'd asked me to leave. I stood there for a moment, watching her direct Maribel with military precision, feeling like an intruder in my own childhood home. I wandered through the rooms I'd grown up in, each one triggering a flood of memories. The library where my mother had read to me every night. The music room where she'd tried to teach me piano, finally giving up when it became clear I'd inherited none of her musical talent. The sunroom where we'd had tea parties when I was small, where she'd later helped me with homework. But now these rooms felt like exhibits in a museum dedicated to a life I'd somehow lost claim to. Lauren's presence was everywhere, fresh flowers she'd chosen, furniture she'd rearranged, family photos she'd curated. It was as if she'd already erased me from the family narrative. At 11:30 a.m., I heard cars pulling into the driveway, through the front window. I watched family members arriving for what Lauren had planned as her moment of triumph. Uncle Martin stepped out of his Cadillac, followed by Aunt Dorothy and her husband. Cousins I hadn't seen in years emerged from various vehicles, all dressed in their finest clothes for what should have been a private, somber occasion. Lauren greeted each arrival personally, playing the perfect hostess, the devoted daughter who'd sacrificed everything to care for their beloved mother. And I realized with growing dread that this wasn't just a will reading. This was Lauren's coronation. By 1:30 p.m., the back garden had been transformed into something that looked more like a society luncheon than a will reading. White linen tablecloths covered round tables scattered across the manicured lawn, each adorned with arrangements of white roses and baby's breath. Servers in black uniforms moved efficiently between the guests, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres from silver trays. Lauren stood at the center of it all like a queen holding court. She'd changed into a navy blue dress that somehow managed to look both respectful and celebratory, and she worked the crowd with practiced ease. I watched from the kitchen window as she air-kissed cheeks, accepted condolences with gracious nods, and gestured expansively toward the house as if she were already giving tours of her inheritance. "Miss Rachel," Maribel appeared beside me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps you should join the others outside." I could hear the concern in her tone. Even the staff could see I was being systematically excluded from what should have been my family gathering. "In a minute," I said, still watching Lauren command the scene outside. She was speaking with our cousin Bradley now, pointing toward the rose garden our mother had lovingly tended for decades. Even from this distance, I could see Bradley nodding enthusiastically, probably already calculating how much the landscaping alone was worth. A Blacktown car pulled into the driveway at exactly 1:50 p.m., and I felt my stomach clench. Daniel Carver, our family's attorney for the past 15 years, emerged from the passenger seat carrying a leather briefcase that undoubtedly contained the documents that would determine my future. Carver was a tall, thin man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. He'd handled our family's legal affairs since before I'd left for college, and I remembered him as serious but kind, the type of lawyer who genuinely cared about his clients rather than just their billable hours. Lauren descended upon him immediately, taking his arm and guiding him through the crowd like she was presenting a prized guest at her dinner party. I watched her lean in close to speak with him, her hand resting possessively on his sleeve. Whatever she was saying made him nod politely, though his expression remained professionally neutral. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. As Lauren continued her animated conversation with Carver, she discreetly slipped a white envelope into Uncle Martin's hand. The exchange was so subtle I almost missed it, but Martin's quick glance around before tucking the envelope into his jacket pocket confirmed what I'd seen. What was in that envelope? And why was Lauren passing it to Martin just minutes before the will reading? I forced myself to walk outside, though every step felt like I was walking toward my own execution. The conversations quieted as I appeared, replaced by the kind of polite smiles people wear at funerals when they don't know what else to do. Aunt Dorothy gave me a brief hug that felt obligatory, and Cousin Bradley offered his condolences in the same tone he might use to comment on the weather. "Rachel, darling," Lauren called out, her voice carrying across the garden with artificial warmth. "Come meet with Mr. Carver before we begin." I approached the small group that had formed around the attorney, feeling distinctly like I was walking into hostile territory. Carver extended his hand with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Miss Whitmore, I'm so sorry for your loss," he said. "Your mother was a remarkable woman." "Thank you," I managed. "She spoke of you often." Lauren's smile never wavered, but I caught the flash of annoyance in her eyes. She didn't like being reminded that I'd had regular conversations with our mother. "Daniel was just telling us about the arrangements," Lauren said smoothly. "We'll be conducting the reading in the parlor, of course. Much more intimate than doing it in some stuffy law office." "Actually," Carver said, consulting his watch, "we should probably begin. I have another appointment at 4 p.m. As the crowd began moving toward the house, I found myself walking beside Uncle Martin. He'd always been my mother's favorite brother, a successful businessman who'd helped finance some of our family's real estate investments over the years. But today he seemed nervous, constantly adjusting his tie and checking his jacket pocket where I'd seen him slip Lauren's envelope. "Uncle Martin," I said quietly as we climbed the porch steps, "are you feeling all right? You seem a bit on edge." He startled at my voice, then forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Just the stress of the day, sweetheart. These occasions are never easy." But his hand moved instinctively to his jacket pocket again, and I knew there was more to his nervousness than grief. The parlor had been arranged like a small theater, with chairs facing the antique mahogany desk where Carver was setting up his materials. Lauren had claimed the front row center seat, naturally, while I found myself relegated to a chair in the second row between Aunt Dorothy and a family friend whose name I couldn't remember. Carver opened his briefcase with methodical precision, removing several folders and placing them on the desk in neat stacks. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the rustle of papers. "Before we begin," Carver said, looking around the room, "I need to confirm that all interested parties are present." His eyes found mine, and I felt a flicker of something surprise relief cross his features. "Miss Rachel Whitmore is here," he continued, making a note on his legal pad. "Good. There was some question about whether you'd be able to attend." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Lauren's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course I'm here," I said louder than I'd intended. "She was my mother." "Naturally," Carver replied, but his tone suggested this hadn't been as obvious to everyone else as it was to me. "Well then, shall we proceed?" He lifted the first document from his stack, and I noticed Lauren straighten in her chair, her hands folded primly in her lap like a student preparing to receive an award she knew was coming. The grandfather clock chimed twice, marking 2 o'clock exactly. Outside, I could hear the catering staff continuing their preparations for what Lauren clearly expected to be a celebration. "Saw the last will and testament of Margaret Elizabeth Whitmore," Carver began, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly airless room. Lauren's smile was radiant, confident, victorious. She had no idea what was coming. "The last will and testament of Margaret Elizabeth Whitmore," Carver repeated, adjusting his reading glasses. "Dated March 15th, 2024. I did quick math in my head. March 15th was only 8 months ago. Well after my mother's cancer diagnosis, but before she'd entered the final stages of her illness. Lauren shifted in her seat, and I caught her exchanging a meaningful glance with Uncle Martin. "I, Margaret Elizabeth Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils, and declare this to be my last will and testament," Carver continued in his measured legal tone. The standard opening words washed over me as I studied the faces around the room. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the moment when Lauren's inheritance would be officially confirmed. Aunt Dorothy dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Cousin Bradley leaned forward in his chair like he was watching a particularly exciting sporting event. "To my dear brother Martin Whitmore, I leave my collection of first edition novels and the sum of $50,000 in gratitude for his unwavering support during my illness." Uncle Martin nodded solemnly, though I noticed his hand move to his jacket pocket again. $50,000 was generous but not unexpected. Martin had always been close to our mother. "To my sister Dorothy Caldwell, I leave my jewelry collection, excluding the items specified elsewhere in this document, and the sum of $25,000. Aunt Dorothy's sob was audible, though whether from grief or gratitude was unclear. Carver continued through a list of smaller bequests, money to longtime staff, donations to charities our mother had supported, personal items distributed among various family members. Each bequest was met with polite nods and murmurs of appreciation. Standard will fare that confirmed what everyone expected. Margaret Whitmore had been thoughtful and generous in death as she had been in life. Lauren sat perfectly still through all of this, her confident smile never wavering. She knew these were just the preliminaries, the appetizers before the main course. The real estate, the investment portfolio, the bulk of the estate everyone in this room knew that was coming to her. "Now," Carver said, turning to a new page, "regarding the primary estate assets." The room fell completely silent. Even the grandfather clock seemed to pause between ticks. "To my daughter Lauren Patricia Whitmore," Carver read, and I felt my heart sink into my stomach. Here it comes, I thought. The moment Lauren had been orchestrating for months. "I leave the sum of $100,000 in my personal vehicle, a 2022 Mercedes-Benz sedan." "Wait, what?" I blinked, certain I'd misheard. $100,000 was substantial, but it wasn't. It wasn't everything. Where was the house? Where were the investment accounts that had funded our family's lifestyle for generations? Lauren's smile flickered, just for a moment, like a candle in a breeze. But I caught it. "Additionally," Carver continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension building in the room, "Lauren will receive my grandmother's engagement ring and pearl necklace, items that have been in our family for 4 generations. That was it. Carver moved on to the next section without another word about Lauren's inheritance. Around the room, people began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't what anyone had expected. "The remainder of my estate," Carver's voice cut through the growing murmur of confusion, "including but not limited to the family residence at 12 Magnolia Creek Drive. All investment accounts, stocks, bonds, and real estate holdings. I leave to my daughter Rachel Marie Whitmore." The words hit the room like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been punched in the chest. Around me, faces turned toward me with expressions of shock, confusion, and in some cases, outright hostility. But it was Lauren's face that captured my attention. The confident smile had vanished completely, replaced by something I'd never seen there before: raw, undisguised panic. "There must be some mistake," Lauren said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. She half rose from her chair, then seemed to remember where she was and forced herself to sit back down. "Mr. Carver, surely there's been some confusion with the documents." Carver looked at her over his reading glasses with the patience of a man who'd dealt with surprised beneficiaries many times before. "There's no mistake, Miss Whitmore. However, there are specific conditions attached to Miss Rachel's inheritance." Conditions. Of course there were conditions. My mother had always been thorough in everything she did. Rachel Marie Whitmore must take up residence in the family home within 30 days of this reading and maintain that residence for a minimum of 1 calendar year. During this time, the property cannot be sold, rented, or otherwise transferred. Additionally, Lauren Patricia Whitmore is expressly forbidden from interfering with Rachel's occupancy or attempting to contest these arrangements. The last part was clearly aimed at Lauren, and from the way her face had gone pale, she understood the message perfectly. "This is ridiculous," Lauren burst out, abandoning all pretense of composure. "Rachel hasn't even lived in this state for over 15 years. She was never here when Mother needed her. She missed appointments, missed holidays, missed—" "Lauren!" Uncle Martin's voice was sharp, warning. He was staring at Carver with an expression I couldn't read, his hand still pressed against his jacket pocket. But Lauren was beyond being silenced. She stood up fully now, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I was the one who drove Mother to every doctor's appointment. I was the one who rearranged my entire life to be available whenever she needed anything. I was the one who contacted Morrison Realty about listing this house for sale while your mother was in the hospital last November." Carver's quiet question cut through Lauren's tirade like a blade. The room went deadly silent. Lauren's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was simply exploring options for Mother's care. The house is so large, and maintaining it was becoming difficult for her." "According to the documentation your mother provided to me," Carver continued in the same calm tone, "you had already scheduled a market evaluation and discussed staging the property with a decorator, all without her knowledge or consent." I felt like I was watching a movie where the plot had suddenly taken an impossible turn. Lauren had tried to sell the house while our mother was sick. "Mother was becoming confused," Lauren said desperately. "The medication was affecting her judgment. She didn't understand the financial realities of maintaining a property this size. I was trying to protect her interests." "Your mother's medical records indicate she was mentally competent throughout her illness," Carver replied. "In fact, she specifically requested that Dr. Amanda Foster document her mental acuity on the day she signed this will. Dr. Foster is prepared to testify to that fact if necessary." The word testify hung in the air like a threat. Lauren looked around the room, clearly searching for support, but the faces staring back at her were filled with shock and disapproval. Even Uncle Martin seemed to have distanced himself, his chair somehow appearing farther from hers than it had been moments before. "There will be a legal challenge," Lauren said, her voice shaking with rage. "This will not stand. Rachel manipulated a sick woman, and I will prove it in court." She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, then spun back around to face the room. "Enjoy your victory, Rachel," she spat. "It won't last long." The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, I could hear the catering staff outside, still preparing for a celebration that would never happen. I sat in my chair, staring at the space where my sister had been standing, trying to process what had just occurred. The house, this magnificent, impossible house that I'd never dared to hope for, was mine. But the price of that gift was becoming clearer by the moment. Lauren wasn't just angry. She was destroyed. And from the look I'd seen in her eyes, she was planning to take me down with her. The remaining family members filed out of the parlor in stunned silence. leaving me alone with Daniel Carver and the echo of Lauren's threats. My hands were shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. The house, this impossible, beautiful house, was mine, but Lauren's parting words felt like a sword hanging over my head. Miss Whitmore," Carver said gently, gathering his papers back into neat stacks. "I believe your mother left something specifically for you to read privately." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a cream-colored envelope with my name written across it in my mother's distinctive handwriting. The sight of those familiar loops and curves made my chest tighten with grief I hadn't fully processed yet. "She asked me to give this to you after the reading," he continued. "She was quite specific about the timing." I took the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind my mother had always used for important correspondence. Through the cream-colored paper, I could see the shadow of several handwritten pages. "Mr. Carver," I said before he could leave, "what Lauren said about a legal challenge, is that possible?" His expression grew serious. "Anyone can file a contest, Miss Whitmore, but your mother was very thorough in her preparations. She anticipated there might be resistance to her decisions." The way he said it suggested he knew more than he was letting on. Should I be worried? "Read your mother's letter," he said with a slight smile. "I think you'll find she's given you everything you need." After Carver left, I sat alone in the parlor with the envelope in my lap, listening to the sounds of the catering staff dismantling Lauren's celebration outside. Through the window, I could see guests leaving in small groups, their voices carrying across the garden in hushed, urgent conversations. No doubt they were already spreading the news throughout Savannah's social circles. Finally, I opened the envelope. "My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, then Daniel has done as I asked, and the truth is finally out. I imagine you're confused and probably frightened by what just happened in that room. Lauren's reaction was predictable, though I had hoped she might surprise me with some grace. I need you to understand why I made these decisions, because I know they will be questioned and attacked in the coming weeks." My mother's handwriting was weaker than I remembered, clearly affected by her illness, but her words were as sharp and clear as ever. "For the past 2 years, ever since my cancer diagnosis, Lauren has been pressuring me to downsize. She presented it as concern for my welfare, but I discovered the truth quite by accident. Last November, when I was in the hospital for my second round of chemotherapy, I received a call from Morrison Realty asking to confirm our appointment for a market evaluation. I had never made such an appointment. My breath caught in my throat. So Carver had been telling the truth about Lauren's attempts to sell the house. When I questioned Lauren, she claimed it was merely research to help me understand my options. But Maribel had overheard phone conversations where Lauren discussed timing the sale for maximum market value. She was planning to sell our family home while I was too weak to stop her. "This house isn't just real estate. Rachel, it's 4 generations of our family's history. Your great-great-grandfather built it with his own hands. Your grandmother planted the rose garden where you used to play as a child. I've spent 40 years making it a home, not an investment property." Lauren sees dollar signs where I see memories. You see the memories too. I know because of the way your voice softened whenever you asked about the garden during our Sunday calls, or when you mentioned the reading nook in the library where I used to tell you stories. Tears were streaming down my face now. I hadn't realized my mother had noticed those small things in our conversations. "I know you think you weren't a good enough daughter because you lived far away. That's simply not true. You respected my independence. You called every week but never made me feel like a burden. You asked about my health without treating me like an invalid. You remembered my birthday, my doctor's appointments, the anniversary of your father's death. Lauren, for all her physical presence, made me feel like a project to be managed. Every conversation became about what I couldn't do anymore, what accommodations needed to be made, what decisions I was no longer capable of making on my own. The final straw came 3 weeks ago. Lauren brought me paperwork to sign what she claimed were updated medical directives, but I read every page carefully, as I always do, and buried in the legal language was a power of attorney that would have given her complete control over my financial decisions. My hands were shaking so violently now I could barely hold the letter. When I confronted her, she said it was for my own protection, and that I was too emotional to make rational decisions about my care. That's when I knew I had to act. I called Daniel immediately and had him draft this will. I also asked Dr. Foster to document my mental state thoroughly, knowing Lauren would likely claim I was incompetent. The neurological tests, cognitive assessments, and psychiatric evaluation are all on file with Daniel's office. But there's something else you need to know, something I discovered that made me realize how far Lauren was willing to go. Last week, I asked Maribel to bring me my mail directly instead of letting Lauren sort through it first. Among the letters was a statement from Morrison Realty not for an evaluation, but for a signed listing agreement. Lauren had forged my signature and put the house on the market. I gasped aloud. Forgery was a crime, a serious crime. I have the original document, Rachel. It's in my bedroom safe, along with copies of all the phone records showing Lauren's communications with the realtor. The combination is your birth date month, day, year. Daniel has copies of everything as well. I'm not telling you this to turn you against your sister. Despite everything, I love Lauren and I hope someday she'll understand why I made these choices. But I won't let her sell our family's legacy to fund whatever lifestyle she thinks she deserves. This house needs someone who will love it, not liquidate it. Someone who understands that some things are worth more than their market value. Be strong, my darling girl. Lauren will fight this with everything she has, but you have the truth on your side, and sometimes that's enough. All my love, Mother. P.S. Maribel knows everything. Trust her. I sat in the growing twilight of the parlor, my mother's letter clutched against my chest, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Lauren hadn't just been planning to sell the house, she'd actually tried to do it, behind our dying mother's back, with forged documents. Outside, I could hear the last of the catering trucks pulling away, leaving the garden empty and silent. The celebration Lauren had planned had turned into something entirely different. And I was about to discover that this was only the beginning. The legal papers arrived exactly 1 week later, delivered by a stone-faced process server at 7:32 a.m., while I was still in my pajamas, drinking coffee in the kitchen that was now legally mine. Rachel Marie Whitmore, the young man asked, clipboard in hand. Yes. You've been served? The thick manila envelope felt heavier than it should have as I signed for it. Through the window, I watched the server walk back to his car while Maribel hovered nearby, wringing her hands with worry. Miss Rachel, what is it? She asked softly. I tore open the envelope and scanned the legal letterhead, Pemberton, Hayes & Associates, attorneys at law. Lauren had hired one of Savannah's most prestigious law firms, the kind that charged $500 an hour and specialized in making problems disappear for wealthy families. Petition to contest will, case no, CV 2024-8847. Plaintiff Lauren Patricia Whitmore versus Defendant Rachel Marie Whitmore. The plaintiff alleges that the deceased, Margaret Elizabeth Whitmore, was subjected to undue influence and manipulation by the defendant, resulting in a will that does not reflect the true intentions of the deceased. The legal language was dense and intimidating, but the accusations were crystal clear. Lauren was claiming I had manipulated our dying mother into changing her will. She was demanding the court overturn the inheritance and distribute the estate according to what she called the deceased's true intentions. But it was the supporting documents that made my blood run cold. Lauren had assembled character witnesses who claimed I had been distant and uncaring toward our mother. She had medical records suggesting our mother had been confused and medicated during her final months. Most damaging of all, she had sworn statements from 2 family members claiming they'd witnessed me pressuring our mother during hospital visits that I knew I'd never made. Uncle Martin's signature was at the bottom of one of those statements. "The lying bastard," I whispered, remembering the white envelope Lauren had slipped him at the will reading. I spent the morning pacing through the house, reading and rereading the legal documents until the words blurred together. Lauren wasn't just contesting the will, she was trying to destroy my reputation in the process. If she succeeded, I wouldn't just lose the house. I'd be branded as someone who'd exploited a dying woman for money. By 10 a.m., I was sitting in the law office of Patricia Halloway, the attorney Daniel Carver had recommended when I'd called him in a panic. Halloway's office was in a converted Victorian mansion downtown, and her reputation was legendary. If Lauren had hired Pemberton and Hayes, I needed someone equally formidable. Patricia Halloway was nothing like what I'd expected. She was perhaps 55, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through pretense. She wore a simple black suit that probably cost more than my car, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades winning cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. "Ms. Whitmore," she said after reviewing Lauren's petition, "your sister is playing with fire." "What do you mean?" Contesting a will based on undue influence is difficult under the best circumstances. But when you have documented evidence that the person filing the contest was themselves attempting to manipulate the deceased. She smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "That's a very different story." I pulled out my mother's letter and the copies I'd made of the documents from her safe. The forged listing agreement, the phone records showing Lauren's communications with Morrison Realty, the power of attorney paperwork that would have given Lauren complete control over our mother's finances. Halloway studied each document with the careful attention of a surgeon examining an X-ray. "Your mother was thorough," she said finally, "and smart. She knew this was coming." "But Lauren has witnesses saying I pressured Mother. People are going to believe the evidence," Halloway interrupted. "And the evidence tells a very clear story. Your sister was attempting to defraud a dying woman, and when that failed, she's now trying to overturn a legally executed will with manufactured testimony." She leaned back in her leather chair, steepling her fingers. "There's something else you should know. I've handled cases against Pemberton and Hayes before. They're expensive and they're ruthless. But they're not stupid. If they took this case, it's because Lauren convinced them she had a strong position. That suggests she's not telling them about the forged documents." "What does that mean?" "It means when we present this evidence in court, it's going to come as a complete surprise to her legal team. And lawyers don't like surprises, especially ones that make them look incompetent." Over the next hour, Halloway outlined our strategy. We would let Lauren's team present their case first, allowing them to commit to their narrative about my supposed manipulation. Then we would systematically dismantle every claim with documented evidence. "There's one more thing we need," Halloway said as our meeting wrapped up. "The medical records your mother mentioned. If Dr. Foster documented your mother's mental competency, those records will be crucial." "I'll get them." "Good. And Ms. Whitmore, I want you to prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly before it's over. Your sister is fighting for what she believes should have been hers, and people in that situation can be unpredictable." As if summoned by her words, my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "You think you've won, but this is just the beginning. That house should be mine, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it back. L." I showed the message to Halloway, who photographed it with her phone. "Document everything," she advised. "Every communication, every interaction. If your sister is desperate enough to forge documents, she might be desperate enough to try other things." I left Halloway's office feeling more confident than I had since opening Lauren's legal papers that morning. But as I drove back through Savannah's tree-lined streets toward the house that had become the center of this battle, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lauren's threat had been more than just angry words. She'd said she would do whatever it takes, and I was beginning to understand that Lauren's definition of whatever it takes might be more dangerous than I'd imagined. The real war was just beginning. The Chatham County Courthouse was packed at 9 at wham! On the morning of November 15th. Word had spread through Savannah's social circles like wildfire. The Whitmore sisters were going to battle over their mother's millions, and everyone wanted a front row seat to watch old money tear itself apart. I sat beside Patricia Holloway at the defendant's table, wearing the most conservative suit I owned, navy blue with a simple pearl necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. Holloway had coached me extensively on courtroom demeanor. Sit straight, keep your hands folded, react to nothing, and let the evidence speak for itself. Across the aisle, Lauren commanded her own table like a general preparing for war. She wore black, still playing the grieving daughter, and had assembled an impressive legal team. Lead attorney Marcus Pemberton was a silver-haired man in his 60s whose reputation for courtroom theatrics was legendary in Georgia legal circles. Behind Lauren sat her witnesses, Uncle Martin, looking distinctly uncomfortable in an expensive suit, two family friends I barely recognized, and Dr. Richard Hayes, an elderly physician who'd apparently treated our mother years ago. Each of them would testify that I had manipulated our dying mother for financial gain. Judge Catherine Morrison called the court to order at 9:15 a.m. She was a stern woman in her 50s with gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every family drama imaginable play out in her courtroom. "We're here today for the matter of Whitmore versus Whitmore," she announced, a will contest brought by plaintiff Lauren Patricia Whitmore against defendant Rachel Marie Whitmore. Mr. Pemberton, you may proceed with your opening statement. Pemberton rose with theatrical flair, his voice carrying easily through the packed courtroom. Your Honor, this case is about a vulnerable elderly woman who was systematically manipulated by a daughter who had abandoned her family for 15 years. Margaret Whitmore was dying, frightened, and medicated when Rachel Whitmore swooped in from Colorado to prey upon her mother's weakened state. He gestured toward Lauren with practiced sympathy. Lauren Whitmore was the devoted daughter who sacrificed her own life to care for her mother. She drove her to medical appointments, managed her medications, and provided daily companionship during the darkest period of Margaret's life. She is the daughter who deserved her mother's inheritance. The opening statement continued for 20 minutes, painting me as a calculating opportunist and Lauren as a martyred saint. When Pemberton finished, several people in the gallery were dabbing at their eyes with tissues. Then it was Patricia Holloway's turn. She stood slowly, her movements deliberate and confident. When she spoke, her voice was clear and measured. Your Honor, this case is indeed about manipulation, but not the kind Mr. Pemberton described. This case is about a daughter who attempted to defraud her dying mother, and when that failed, decided to attack her sister with manufactured evidence and purchased testimony. Lauren's face went pale at the word defraud, but Holloway was just getting started. The evidence will show that Lauren Whitmore forged her mother's signature on real estate documents, attempted to sell the family home without permission, and tried to trick her mother into signing over financial power of attorney. When Margaret Whitmore discovered these betrayals, she took steps to protect her legacy and her other daughter. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Morrison gavelled for silence. For the next 3 hours, Pemberton presented his case with polished efficiency. Uncle Martin testified that I had seemed calculating during family gatherings and had pressed our mother for details about her will. Dr. Hayes claimed our mother had been confused and easily influenced in her final months. 2 family friends swore they'd witnessed me being aggressive with our mother during hospital visits. It was all lies, but they were convincing lies told by respectable people who looked credible on the witness stand. Then Patricia Holloway began our defense. Your Honor, I called Dr. Amanda Foster. Dr. Foster was our mother's primary oncologist, a serious woman in her 40s who'd treated cancer patients for over 15 years. She took the witness stand with the confident bearing of someone who dealt with life and death decisions every day. Dr. Foster, Holloway began, you treated Margaret Whitmore during her final illness. Can you describe her mental state during that period? Mrs. Whitmore was one of the most mentally acute patients I've ever treated. Dr. Foster replied firmly. Despite her physical decline, her cognitive function remained completely normal throughout her illness. Did you have any concerns about her capacity to make legal decisions? None whatsoever. In fact, in March of this year, Mrs. Whitmore specifically requested that I conduct a comprehensive cognitive assessment. She scored in the 95th percentile for someone her age. Holloway nodded and moved to her table, retrieving a tablet computer. Your Honor, I'd like to present Defense Exhibit A, a video recording made by Dr. Foster on March 15, 2024, the same day Mrs. Whitmore signed her will. The courtroom fell silent as the large screen descended from the ceiling. After a moment of technical adjustment, my mother's face appeared, looking directly into the camera with clear, determined eyes. Today is March 15th, 2024, her voice said clearly. I am Margaret Elizabeth Whitmore, and I am making this recording at my own request. I want there to be no question about my mental capacity or my reasons for the decisions I'm making today. Lauren gripped the edge of her table, her knuckles white. I have discovered that my daughter Lauren has been making plans to sell our family home without my knowledge or consent. She forged my signature on real estate documents and has been pressuring me to sign over financial power of attorney. These actions have made it clear that Lauren views our family legacy as nothing more than assets to be liquidated. The video continued for 10 more minutes, with my mother calmly and methodically explaining her decision to leave the house to me instead of Lauren. She spoke about Lauren's attempts to control her finances, the forged real estate documents, and her determination to protect the family home. When the video ended, the courtroom was dead silent. Holloway then presented the forged listing agreement, the phone records showing Lauren's communications with Morrison Realty, and the power of attorney documents Lauren had tried to trick our mother into signing. Each piece of evidence was devastating, but together they painted an undeniable picture of betrayal and attempted fraud. Uncle Martin's face had gone ashen. He kept glancing toward the exit as if calculating whether he could escape before being called as a witness for perjury. Pemberton tried valiantly to recover, objecting to the video evidence and challenging the authenticity of the documents. But Patricia Holloway had anticipated every move. She had additional witnesses: the nurse who'd been present during the video recording, the bank employee who'd documented Lauren's attempts to access their mother's accounts, even the Morrison Realty agent who confirmed Lauren had tried to list the house. By 3:30 p.m., Lauren's case had completely collapsed. Pemberton was making increasingly desperate objections, and Lauren herself looked like she was going to be sick. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess, and I watched Lauren hurry toward the bathroom with her hand pressed to her mouth. When she returned 15 minutes later, her perfect makeup couldn't hide the fact that she'd been crying. The closing arguments were almost anticlimactic. Pemberton did his best to salvage something from the wreckage, but the evidence was overwhelming. Patricia Holloway's closing was surgical. She methodically dismantled every claim Lauren had made and highlighted the clear evidence of fraud and manipulation. Your Honor, she concluded, Margaret Whitmore's will should stand exactly as written. She made her decision with full knowledge of the facts and with complete mental capacity. The only manipulation in this case came from the person now trying to overturn her mother's final wishes. Judge Morrison didn't even need to recess to consider her decision. The evidence presented today clearly supports the validity of Margaret Whitmore's will. The petition to contest is denied. Additionally, I'm ordering the plaintiff to pay all court costs and the defendant's legal fees. She looked directly at Lauren before continuing. Furthermore, I'm referring the matter of the forged documents to the district attorney's office for possible criminal prosecution. The gavel came down with finality. It was over. The courthouse emptied slowly after Judge Morrison's final gavel. I sat in the defendant's chair for a long moment, watching the crowd file out in hushed conversations and sideways glances. The weight of victory felt strange, heavier than I'd expected, tinged with sadness rather than triumph. Lauren remained at her table, her legal team packing their briefcases around her like she was a piece of abandoned furniture. Her perfect composure had finally cracked completely. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, and her hands shook as she stared at the table where her dreams of inheritance had just died. Uncle Martin had disappeared the moment Judge Morrison mentioned referring the case to the district attorney. The two family friends who'd testified against me slipped out through the back exit, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Dr. Hayes packed his medical bag with the careful movements of a man calculating how much this testimony might cost his reputation. Patricia Halloway gathered our documents with efficient satisfaction. "Well," she said quietly, "that went even better than I'd hoped. Your mother chose her evidence well." I watched Lauren finally stand, her legs unsteady beneath her. She turned toward me, and for a moment I thought she might approach, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, maybe just to say goodbye to the sister she'd underestimated so completely. Instead, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not even hatred, something deeper and more final. The look of someone who'd lost everything and knew exactly who to blame for it. She walked past my table without a word, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that sounded like a funeral march. The courtroom doors swung shut behind her, and I knew with absolute certainty that I would never see my sister again. The gallery had mostly cleared, but a few people lingered. Maribel sat in the back row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She'd been crying, whether from relief or sadness. I couldn't tell. When she caught my eye, she nodded once, a gesture that somehow contained both approval and sympathy. Several community members approached as I packed my own materials. Mrs. Henderson from the Historical Society shook my hand and welcomed me back to Savannah. The president of our Mother's Garden Club invited me to the next meeting. These were people who'd known our family for decades, who understood what the house meant beyond its monetary value. But their kindness couldn't entirely erase the hollow feeling in my chest. I'd won the battle, but I'd lost my sister in the process. Even though Lauren had betrayed our mother's trust and tried to destroy me in court, she was still the girl who'd taught me to ride a bike in the circular driveway, who'd helped me with my homework at the kitchen table, who'd held me when our father died. Patricia Halloway walked me to my car in the courthouse parking lot. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and the November air carried the first hint of winter. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you go home," she said simply. "You live in that beautiful house your mother left you. You tend her gardens, preserve her legacy, and try to find some peace in the knowledge that justice was served." "And Lauren?" Halloway's expression grew serious. "The district attorney will decide whether to pursue criminal charges for the forgery. If they do, Lauren could face significant legal consequences. But honestly, after what happened in that courtroom today, her reputation in this community is already destroyed. Sometimes that's punishment enough." I drove through Savannah's historic district as the sun set behind the live oaks, their Spanish moss swaying in the evening breeze like gray curtains. The city looked exactly as it had during my childhood, timeless, elegant, somehow separate from the rest of the world. But everything felt different now. I was no longer a visitor here. I was home. The house stood waiting for me on Magnolia Creek Drive, its turquoise shutters glowing in the golden light. The gardens my mother had loved so much spread across the front lawn like a carefully orchestrated symphony of color and texture. This was mine now, not just the building, but the responsibility of preserving 4 generations of family history. Maribel had beaten me home and was waiting on the front porch with a cup of sweet tea and the kind of smile that comes after a storm has finally passed. "Miss Rachel," she said as I climbed the steps, "your mother would be very proud." That night, I sat in the library where my mother used to read to me, surrounded by the first edition novels she'd left to Uncle Martin books he'd never come to claim. The house was quiet except for the familiar sounds I'd grown up with, the grandfather clock ticking in the parlor, the old pipes settling as the temperature dropped, the whisper of wind through the magnolia trees outside. I opened my mother's jewelry box and found the letter she'd left for me, reading it again by lamplight. Her words felt different now, less like instructions and more like a conversation between 2 women who understood the weight of legacy and the price of doing what's right. Lauren was gone from my life, probably forever. Uncle Martin faced possible criminal charges. The family I'd grown up with had essentially imploded in a single afternoon. But sitting in that library, surrounded by generations of family memories and the security of knowing this house would never be sold to strangers, I felt something I hadn't expected: peace. My mother had been right. Some things were worth more than their market value. Some battles were worth fighting, even when victory came with a cost. The $2.7 million house was mine, but more importantly, the legacy it represented would survive. And perhaps, in time, that would be enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story of family betrayal, legal battles, and ultimate justice. I'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and let me know where you're listening from so we can connect with fellow story lovers around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping revenge stories and share your thoughts about Rachel's journey in the comments. Did you see Lauren's downfall coming, or were you surprised by the twists? I'm excited to hear your perspective.